£400, said the widow Dunmore, in good notes, and the articles signed for 3 years, and I will not be argued down by a gentleman who cannot get himself a dryer for love nor money. The estate room at Quernmore smelled of ink and old apples. There were wasps at the window, 3 of them, working at the same crack in the putty, and Maud Hallowe's stood by the door with her box at her feet and counted them because there was nothing else in the room that belonged to her. Her aunt had spread a paper on the table as though it were a deed to land. The Duke of Quernmore read it, standing up. He was a big man gone still, brown at the wrists, with a burn scar on the back of one hand shaped like a comma, and he read the paper twice without any expression at all. "You have written here that you trained her," he said. "I kept her. Keeping is training in a house like mine, and this figure is for the keeping." "That figure is for 4 years of my bread," her aunt said, "and if it seems a great deal to your grace, you may consider what a dryer is worth to you at present, which is to say what you can get for nothing, which is to say nothing at all." He looked past her, then at the girl by the door, for rather longer than a man ought. Then he put his hand into his coat for his pocketbook. A fortnight before that, in the wash-house behind her aunt's lodging-house in Stapleford, Maud had been elbow-deep in grey water when a shadow filled the doorway and coughed like a man paying a debt. "They tell me in the yard," said the shadow, "that there is a Hallowe's here, out of Yalding, out of the Medway Gardens. There is a Hallowe's here." She did not look up. She is doing the sheets. Then she will not mind an old man's rudeness. He came in and stood where the light was, and she saw the sulphur stains on his cuffs before she saw his face, which was the face of a man who had been dried along with everything else he handled. He untied a handkerchief on the copper lid. Inside it was a fistful of hops, last year's, gone the colour of weak tea. "Tell me what those are," he said. Maud dried her hands on her apron, and then she did not touch them at all for a moment. She smelled them first, close, the way a person smells a cork. Then she took up a single cone and rolled it between finger and thumb until it broke. "They are prime hops," she said, "spoiled by a man in a hurry. Go on. The petal crumbles, so somebody will tell you they were dry. But look at the strig." She held the little stem out to him and bent it, and it bent and did not snap. There is water in that yet. When the strig snaps instead of bowing, the hop is dry through. When the leaf is dust and the strig is a green twig, then the fire was too fierce and too short, and the outside cooked while the inside sat wet, and you have case-hardened them like a loaf baked in a bonfire. And they were bagged like that. So the wet came out of the middle in the pocket, all winter, in the dark, with nothing to carry it off. By Candlemas they will have smelled of a damp cupboard, and there is far too much brimstone in them besides. Somebody burnt sulphur to make them bright, because bright hops fetch bright money, and he burnt it as if the price were in the smoke. She put the cone back in the handkerchief and folded it for him, neatly, the way she folded everything. "Whose are they?" "His Grace of Quernmore's," said Silas. 90 acres of the best hop ground in the Weald, 5 kilns as new as a coin, and every pocket we send to Suffolk comes back at a price that would shame a hedge crop. I am the dryer. I am 71 years of age, and I cannot get up a kiln ladder twice in a night without stopping halfway to argue with my chest. Then hire a man. I have offered wages that would make a curate weep. No dryer in 3 counties will come to Quernmore. He said it without heat, as if the weather were also unreasonable. Your father dried for 4 parishes and never sent out a musty pocket in his life. He had a girl at his elbow from the time she could carry a scuppet. He had a girl at his elbow because he had no son and no money to pay anybody, Maud said. It is not the same as an education. It is better than one. Silas set his hand on the copper to take his weight. "Will you come and look at my kilns?" She thought of the sheets. She thought of the 15 years between 19 and 34 and how they went by in a lodging-house and how nobody in a lodging-house ever once asked her opinion of anything. "I will come and look at them," she said. But you had better hear my terms while there is only the two of us and no one to be offended. Nobody puts fire under hops I am drying, and nobody takes them off the hair but me, not a duke, not an undercarter with an opinion, not you, though you have 40 years on me and are probably right about most of it. If I am to answer for what comes off, I will have the whole of it in my own hands or none. That is a great deal of pride for a woman with her arms in a copper. It is not pride, said Maud. It is arithmetic. 2 people minding one fire is 1 person too many, and the hops know it before either of them does. Her aunt heard all of it from the passage, which was where her aunt heard most things. She came into the wash-house before Silas was through the gate, and her face had the look it wore on quarter day. "A duke," she said, "a duke's kilns. You will not go near the place without me. You have never in your life gone near a hop garden." "I have never in my life," said Aunt Dunmore, "let a thing go out of this house without knowing what it fetched." So they went to Quernmore together in a hired trap on a hot morning at the end of August, with the whole weald standing up green on both sides of the road, bine on string and pole 13 feet high, and the smell coming off it like nothing else in the world smells. Bitter and sweet at once, resin and hay and the inside of a jar of preserves. Maud put her head out of the trap and breathed it, and could have wept, and did not because her aunt was watching, and because a woman being sold does better to look bored. He counted out the notes on the table with the wasps working at the putty. "You will want the articles," Aunt Dunmore said. "I do not want the articles. I want a dryer." He pushed the money across. "The sum you have written down is a great deal more than a fair one. You know that, and so do I, and so does your niece. And it seems to me you have all 3 of us where you want us. I am paying it because I have no time. The picking begins on Monday whether anybody is ready or not. Then we are agreed. We are not agreed on anything. We have made a bargain, which is a different thing." He put the pocketbook away. "Wages are a separate matter and are hers, in her own hand, monthly, and the first of them is paid whether the crop is saved or lost. Say in front of me that you understand that, madam, because you look to me like a woman who plans to be in the way on payday." Her aunt smiled with the lower half of her face. "You are very blunt for a mysterious man." "I am not mysterious," he said. "I am unpopular. People make the one out of the other because it is more interesting." Maud spoke then for the first time since the trap. "You have not asked me anything." The Duke turned. Behind him the wasps went on with the putty. "No," he said, "I have not." "Then hear it now, while she is here, so it is said twice, and cannot be undone later by anybody's convenience. Nobody puts fire under hops I am drying, and nobody takes them off but me. If your grace stands at the kiln door at 4 in the morning and tells me those hops are ready, I shall tell your grace to go and look at the moon, and you will go." Her aunt made a small sound of horror that was mostly delight, because a girl who ruins a bargain after the notes are counted is a girl who cannot be blamed on anyone. The Duke looked at Maud Hallowe's for the second time, and this time he did not look away first. "Yes," he said, "those are proper terms. Silas will show you the kilns." Quernmore's Oast Lodge stood at the top of the garden with its back to the hill, 2 round kilns of the old sort, whitewashed, cowled, patched at the roof with lead the colour of a rain cloud, and joined to them by a long stone floor the length of a barn, and beyond it, in a row, 5 square kilns built of new brick with new cowls and new doors, and grass growing up against every one of them. "Those 2 are working," said Silas. "And those 5? "Those 5 are not spoken of." Maud walked the length of the range with her hand on the brickwork, the way a person walks a strange horse. The doors were not locked. Inside the first one, the fire-hole was swept clean and cold, and above her head the hair, the great horsehair cloth stretched over the drying floor, the thing the whole business stands on, hung sound and taut and grey with dust, never once loaded. "They have never been used at all?" "They were used the once," said Silas, 4 years ago come Michaelmas, and then not again, and then the man that built them went off to London for the winter, and when he came back, he had that face on him he has now, and he has not put a shovel of coke in one of them since." 90 acres, Maud said, and 2 old round kilns to dry it in. Now you see why no dryer in the Weald will come. I see why every dryer in the Weald is a fool. She came out into the light, wiping her hands. 2 kilns will take 1/3 of that crop and no more, and the rest will sit in the bins waiting its turn, and green hops in a warm bin do not wait. They heat. 2 days and they are slime, and you may spread them on the roses. He is throwing away 2 pockets in 3 every year and paying a factor to tell him his hops are poor. That, said Silas comfortably, is more or less the state of it. Where do I sleep? He jerked his chin at the end of the long stone floor where a stair went up to a door under the tiles. There, over the cooling floor. It is a hole and it is hot, and there is not a soul within 100 yards after dark, which the maids consider a scandal, and I consider the only sensible arrangement on the place, since the fires are here, and so are you. It will do. Your box is in the trap. My box, said Maud, is at the bottom of the stair already. I carried it up while His Grace was counting. The picking began on the Monday, and by the Tuesday Maud had learned the 2 things that would make the next month a matter of nights instead of days, that the crop was heavier than any man on the place had seen, and that the pickers went at it like people who had not eaten since Lady Day. 60 of them came out from the towns and slept in the hop huts along the lane, and Effie ruled them. Effie cooked for the whole lot at a copper in the open, kept the tally book of who had filled what, and had a boy of 6 who followed her about with a bine tied round his middle like a belt. She looked Maud over on the first morning the way a butcher looks over a carcass and finds it wanting. You are the one that was bought, said Effie. I am the one that was hired. Hired? Effie put the lid on the copper. £400 in notes on the estate room table, and the aunt gone off in the trap with it inside her glove. Tam had it from the boy that held the horse. Nobody pays £400 for a hired woman. Nobody pays it for the other thing either, Maud said. Not at his age and not in this county. It is a foolish sum. He paid it because it was Friday and the picking was Monday, and my aunt knew it. Well, said Effie, we shall see what it was for by Michaelmas, shan't we? And she went back to her copper, and that was that for a fortnight. Ned came round sooner. Ned pulled poles, which is the strongest work in a hop garden and the least admired, and he was 29 and shy to the point of pain, and had a way of arriving where a heavy thing needed lifting some seconds before anybody asked. On the 4th evening, Maud was carrying a full bushel basket of green hops up the cooling floor stair with her hip against the wall, and the other end of it went light in her hands. I have it, Ned said behind her. I did not ask you. No. They got it up the stair between them and set it down. Ned looked at the wall for a while. I said a thing in the lane about you the first day, to Tam and them, before I knew you was a dryer proper. What did you say? I would rather not repeat it exact. Then do not, said Maud. I have heard it from 4 other people this week, and it is not even inventive. It was not right of me. No, it was not, but it was cheap, and cheap is not the same as wicked. She straightened up. You may make it good if you like. Can you keep a fire even? He stared. Any fool can keep a fire. Then it is a wonder I have met so few who can. Come up at 8 and I will show you what even means, and then you will know why it is the whole trade and not any part of it. She thought a moment. And Ned, when you are on the stair with a full basket, do not take the top end. Take the bottom end and let the other one see where their feet are going. That is how my father lost a bushel and a thumbnail. The first private word she had with the Duke was in the estate room on the Saturday, and it was all business, and it took 11 minutes. Silas says you want 100 bushels of coke. I want 200 hard coke screened and a shelter to keep it dry in, and I want it before the 12th of September. She stood with her hands behind her back. Your Grace has a great deal of charcoal in the open under a tarpaulin, and it has been rained on, and wet fuel makes an uneven fire, and an uneven fire is why your hops come back from Southwark at 4 pence. They come back at fourpence because they are poor hops. They are poor hops because of the fire. There is nothing wrong with what grows here. I have never in my life stood in a better garden." He was quiet for a moment. 200 bushels is a great deal of coke for 2 kilns. It is a great deal of coke, Maud agreed, for 2 kilns. Say the rest of it. Then I will say it plainly. The 2 round kilns will dry 30 bushels a night between them if I never sleep and Silas never coughs. The garden will yield near 300 bushels a day at the height of it. Your Grace has 5 kilns, standing empty with sound hair on the floors and clean fire holes and the grass grown up to the door. On Friday next, or Saturday at the latest, this crop will begin coming in faster than 2 kilns can take it, and after that, every day I will have to choose which bins to let rot. Then let them rot, he said. Your Grace, you have your terms and you shall have every one of them kept, said the Duke of Quernmore. And here is mine. Fire does not go into that range, not this year and not next year. If you cannot dry the crop in the 2 round kilns, then the crop will not be dried, and you will not be blamed for it, and your wages are the same either way. He was at the window with his back to her, and Maud looked at the burn scar on his hand and did not ask because she had been 4 years in a house where asking was punished, and the habit was still in her. Very well, she said. Then I want the coke anyway. If I am to dry a third of a crop, I will dry the best third that ever went out of this county, and your factor may choke on it. Something happened at the corner of his mouth that was not quite anything. You shall have the coke, he said. On the Wednesday, she found a new scuppet leaning against her kiln door. A scuppet is a wooden shovel near 4 feet of it, the blade thin as a plate, and it is the thing a dryer lives with. You turn the hops with it, and you take them off with it, and if the handle is wrong for your reach, you carry the wrongness in your shoulder all night. Hers had been her father's, and it was too long for her by a good 6 inches, and she had shortened it twice with a saw and made a poor job of it both times. This one was the right length. It was the right length exactly, as though somebody had stood in the doorway while she worked and marked where her hands fell, and the blade was thinner than her old one, and the handle had been rubbed with linseed until it did not catch. She asked Silas. Silas said the carpenter had had a slack afternoon. She asked the carpenter. The carpenter said he had been told to, and then he took a great interest in his plane. Nobody mentioned it, and neither did she, and she used it for 340 hours that month and thought of the man who had measured her arms every single time she picked it up. The wound came out on a Thursday night in the 2nd week, on the cooling floor, in front of her, and she had not asked for it either. The Duke had got into the habit of coming up at about 11, when the last of the pickers had gone down the lane, and standing at the far end of the long floor where the dried hops lay in a drift 2 feet deep coming back to condition. He did not talk much. Sometimes he took the other end of a load without being asked, which was more than most of them did. Silas was on the step with his chest going like a bad hinge, and Maud was kneeling at the kiln door reading the load by feel, and the Duke was doing nothing at all, and Silas said into the middle of it, in the voice of a man who has decided to be rude before he dies. Tell her about Amos Pascoe. The Duke did not move. Silas, she has a right. She is sleeping over your cooling floor with 2 kilns and 90 acres, and she thinks you are a lunatic, and it would be better for her to know you are only a coward. That will do. It will not do. It has not done for 4 years. Silas got his breath. Then I shall tell it, and you may turn me off in the morning, and we shall both be relieved. Miss Hallowes, 4 years back, His Grace read a book. Silas, a gentleman in London wrote it. A gentleman who had never in his life stood in a kiln at 2 in the morning with a load going wrong under him. And in this book it is set down that a kiln built square and loaded deep dries cheaper than a round kiln loaded shallow on account of the coke. His Grace was 25, and had come into the place the year before, and he was full of improvement, the way a young man is full of it, which is to say, he was full of it in the head and nowhere else. They were good calculations, the Duke said. They were beautiful calculations. He built 5 kilns to them, 12 feet square, beds made to load 20 inches deep, and cowls on the top the size the book said, and the whole range up and whitewashed by August. And every dryer on this estate and every tenant who dried in our kilns told him the bed was too deep for the draught, and he did not hear it, because we said it in the way men like us say a thing which is grumbling, and he had it in print. Maud sat back on her heels. Whose hops went into it? Ours, said Silas, and Amos Pascoe's. Amos had 22 acres on the Lench and no kiln of his own, and he dried with us every year of his life and his father's life. His Grace said to him, "Come into the new range, and I will take nothing for the drying this year, since it is a trial." And Amos said yes, because he was fond of him. That is the thing that wants saying. Amos Pascoe was fond of him. He had taught him to swim in the Lench when his Grace was a little lad, and Amos was a young man, and he thought a duke who read books was a fine thing to have about the place. And it case-hardened, Maud said. Silas looked at her. Say that again. 20 inches on a square bed with a cowl that size. The fire cannot pull through it. The bottom 4 inches roast and the top 12 stay green, and the outside of every cone goes to dust, while the middle is wet, and you take it off looking like the finest hops in Kent. She said it flatly, because it was flat. It was arithmetic and air. They will have gone into the pockets bright as gold and heated in the dark all winter. 1,100 pockets out of this range and Amos's, said Silas. Every one of them condemned at Southwark in the January. Not down-priced. Condemned. His Grace stood the loss for the estate and offered to stand Amos's, and Amos would not have it taken because he had signed for his own crop, and he was a proud old fool the same as the rest of us. He sold the 22 acres in the spring to a man from Maidstone. He went into a cottage in the town with a wet wall in it. He was dead by the March after, of his chest, and he was 63, and his chest had been bad for years, and any doctor will tell you it was the winter and not the hops. The Duke spoke from the far end of the floor. He was in that cottage because of me. He had a lung like wet paper, and he was in a room with water coming through the plaster because I had a book, and he was fond of me, and I would not be told. That is the whole of it, and it is not improved by being talked about at midnight. No, said Maud, it is not. He looked up at that, sharply, as if she had said something else. I am not going to tell your Grace it was not your doing, she said. It was your doing. Silas has told it straight, and there is nothing in it that lets you off. And if I stood here and made it into bad luck, I would be lying to you on the first month of my wages. She stood up and dusted her knees. The load in the second kiln comes off at 3:45. I would take it as a kindness if somebody would leave the lamp lit at the bottom of my stair, because the wind gets it, and I cannot find the 4th step in the dark. Nobody said anything more that night. But the lamp was lit at the bottom of the stair, and it was lit every night after, and it was not the boy who lit it, because she came down once at 2 and saw who was going away up the path with the tinder box in his hand. The Sunday of the 3rd week was the only whole day the 2 kilns were cold, and Maud slept until 9 and woke up furious about it, and came down onto the cooling floor at 10 to find the Duke sitting on an upturned bushel basket in the middle of her hops with a book on his knee. That is the book, she said. It is a different book by the same gentleman. Give it here. She took it out of his hands, which was a liberty, and turned to the plates at the back and made a noise. Look at that. Look at the cowl he has drawn on that. He has drawn a cowl that cannot turn. It turns in the drawing. Everything turns in a drawing. She sat down on the floor in the hops, which is the most comfortable seat in the county, and read on with her mouth getting smaller. Oh, this is very fine. Here he says that a dryer may know his load is finished by the smell alone, by the smell, in a kiln with 8 pounds of brimstone burning in it. You are hard on him. I am hard on him because he has cost you 5 kilns and a friend, and he is sitting in London at this moment with his feet up, warm as a cat, being called an authority. She turned another page. The prudent planter will not suffer his people to sit up all night, night work being wasteful of candles. Wasteful of candles. Now you are inventing. Read it yourself. She pushed the book at his chest. There, 4th line. The Duke read it. He read it twice, and then he laughed, which was a sound so unpracticed that a pigeon came off the roof. He has never dried a hop in his life, he said. He has never dried anything in his life. He has never even boiled a kettle. He has had kettles boiled at him. Maud lay back in the hops with her hands behind her head, which is what everybody in the trade does when nobody is looking, and what she had not done since she was 15. The whole barn smelled of the crop, that clean, bitter brown smell, and the sun came through the tiles in stripes. Ask me how I know. How do you know? Because he says the hair should be washed each season. Nobody has ever washed a haircloth. You would be a year drying the hair, and the whole point of a hair is that it takes the smell of every crop that has been over it and gives it back to the next one, which is why a new kiln always dries badly for 2 years, and every dryer alive knows it, and no gentleman has ever written it down. She turned her head. Your haircloths in that range are new. Did anybody tell you they would dry badly for 2 years anyway, whatever else you had done? No. Well, there is one thing that was not your fault, and it is a very small thing, and you may have it. They stayed in the barn until the church bell went for the afternoon. He told her that he could shoe a horse badly and had shod 3 in his life and lamed 1. She said that was the most useful thing anybody had told her about him yet. She told him that the worst hops she had ever handled were her own father's in the year he was ill, and that she had dried them wrong at 17 and sent them out and let him be blamed for it in the market, and that he had never once said a word about it to her, and that she had never once thanked him for that silence, and that he was dead now and it was too late to. The Duke said, How long did it take you to forgive yourself for that? I have not, said Maud. It is not a thing you finish. It is a thing you carry about like a cough. He did not say anything for a while, and she let it sit there and did not fill it up, and after a bit he asked her whether it was true that a dryer could tell the parish a hop came from by the smell of it, and she said it was not true, and it was not true in an interesting way, and told him why for 20 minutes, and neither of them mentioned Amos Pascoe or the range or the £400, and it was the best day either of them had had in 4 years. Effie came to her 3 days later at the copper, in front of 30 pickers, and said her piece with the ladle still in her hand, which is how a woman says a hard thing when she does not intend to be interrupted. Sit down. Have that. A bowl went into Maud's hands. That is off the top before the water goes in. You have been having the bottom of the pot for 3 weeks, the same as the rest, and it is not right, and I knew it was not right, and I done it anyway because I had made up my mind about you on the first morning, and I did not care to be wrong so soon. Effie, I have not finished. The ladle came up. My sister was sold, not for 400, for £11 and a place in a house in Rochester, and she was 16. And I have hated everybody it was ever done to ever since, which is a wicked way round to have it, and I know that. When they said in the lane that you was bought, I thought, here it is again, and I would not look at you. She wiped her hands. And then Nan's hand went bad in the bins, and it was you sat up with her, and I never told you to, and nobody was watching, and you never said a word about it after, which is the part I cannot get over. Folk that do a kindness for the look of it always mention it within the week. Maud looked into the bowl. It was a poultice. It was not a great deal. You may keep your modesty, I have no use for it. Effie sat down beside her heavily. There, I have said it. You will have the top of the pot for the rest of the picking, and if any of them says a word in the lane, they may say it to me, and they will find it is not worth what it costs. And I would take it kind if you would call me Effie and not Mrs., because I have not been Mrs. to anybody I respected in 11 years. Then you had better call me Maud. "I shall call you the dryer," said Effie, "which is worth more in this garden, and you may have Maud off my boy, who has no manners and will do it anyway." On the 12th of September, the weather changed its mind. It came in hot from the south with no wind at all in it, 48 hours of it, and hot bine in that heat comes on all at once. By the Friday morning, the whole of the great garden was ready together, every acre, and there were 320 bushels of green hops in the bins by 2 in the afternoon. And the 2 round kilns were full, and the glass in the estate room was falling. Maud stood at the top of the garden with Silas and did the sum out loud because it was too big to do in her head. 30 bushels a night. 30, Silas said. There are 320 in the bins now, and there will be 300 more tomorrow, and it is 78 degrees in the shade, and a bin of green hops in this heat heats in 14 hours and stinks in 20. By Sunday night, we shall have 600 bushels of the best hops in the Weald turning to dung in the open air, and 2 kilns going merrily, and it will not matter in the least what I know about anything. Silas said nothing, because there was nothing, and went off down the garden to tell the pickers to slow, which is a thing you may tell a hop picker who is paid by the bushel and is like telling the river to slow. She found the Duke at 4 o'clock in the 5th kiln of the range, which is where he had been for an hour, standing under the cold hair with his hands in his pockets. "You know what I have come to say?" she said. "Yes." "Then I will not say it, and we may skip to the part where you refuse me, and I shall go and get some sleep while I still can." "Tell me what you would do," he said. "Not what you want, what you would do tonight if I were not in it at all." So she told him, standing in the dust in his ruined kiln, and it took her a quarter of an hour, and it was the first time in 4 years that anybody at Quernmore had said out loud how the range might be made to work. "Your bed is built to load 20 inches. I would load it 10 inches, no more, and I should want it levelled by hand and not by shovel, because a scuppet leaves ridges, and a ridge is a chimney, and a chimney is how you get 1 square foot of dust and 100 square feet of green. 10 inches level, and the fire made small and kept the same. Not a great heat. A little heat for a long while, and the sulphur laid on at the start and not at the end, 4 pounds and not 8, and the door of the fire hole set half open with a brick, and the brick not touched by anybody all night, whatever they think they know. And the cowls? The cowls are too small and cannot be made bigger this side of Christmas. So we work with the draught we have and not the draught the gentleman in London drew. That is why the bed must be shallow. You cannot argue a kiln into pulling more air. You can only give it less to pull through. She wiped her forehead with her wrist. 10 inches will dry in 6 hours instead of 12, so there are 2 loads a night in every kiln, and that is why nobody does it, because 2 loads a night means somebody carrying green hops up that stair at midnight, and again at 6, and it means twice the coke, and it means a person awake in every kiln the whole night through with nothing to do but look at a fire and not improve it. How many people? 5 kilns, 2 loads. 5 to watch, 4 to carry, 2 on the press, 11, and I will take the middle 3 kilns myself and walk between them, and I shall want Silas on a chair on this floor doing nothing but telling me if I've gone stupid, and I want it understood by everybody from the first hour that I am the only one who says a load is ready. She stopped, and it may not answer. I want that said too in the daylight before we begin. Your bricks are not good bricks, and I have never fired a square kiln in my life, and I am guessing at the last 2 inches of that bed. The Duke stood looking at the hair over his head for a long time. Amos said the bed was too deep, he said. He said it in that doorway. He said, "Master, that is a deal of hops to ask one fire to look through," and I told him the calculation was sound. It was not sound. No. "And if you put fire in here tonight and it goes wrong again," Maud said, "it will be your doing that time as well, and you will have done it twice, and everybody in the parish will know it. That is what I am asking you to take. I would not have you think I am asking for something small." He turned round. There was more light in the kiln than there ought to have been, and it came in through the door they had both left standing open. "Load them," he said. They lit the range at 7, and the 11 turned out to be 19, because word went along the huts, and men who had pulled poles for 11 hours came up the hill in their own time and were no use to anybody for the first hour and were indispensable by 10. Effie's copper came up the garden on a cart and stayed alight all night. Ned carried green hops up the kiln stair from 7 at night until 5:30 in the morning, bottom end of the basket every time, and would not be got to stop. And at 4 in the morning he was talking, which nobody had heard him do before, and by 5 he had made an argument that the pole pullers ought to be paid by the acre and not the day, and he was right. The Duke shoveled coke. He was under the 5th kiln with his coat off for 6 hours, and he made a small, even fire and kept it small and even, and did not touch the brick in the firehole door, though his hand went to it 4 separate times in the first hour and stopped, and the 5th time he put both hands in his pockets and stood back, and that was the whole of what happened between the two of them all night, and it was a great deal. At 12:30, Maud came down out of the 3rd kiln with her arms yellow to the elbow with lupulin, the sticky gold dust that comes off drying hops and gets into every crease of a person, and she found him at the fire hole and knelt down beside him without being asked, because a fire is easier to argue about at eye level. "Show me your hand." "It is nothing." "You have shoveled hard coke for 3 hours with a duke's hands. Show me." She took it and turned it to the light, and there was the old comma-shaped scar on the back of it, and under the fingers a burn from the shovel handle going up in a blister the length of a bean pod. "That will break and go bad. Sit still." She had a rag and a bottle of oil in her apron because a dryer always has, and she bound it, and neither of them said one word for the whole of the time it took, and the fire went on making its small noise, and somewhere up above them the hops were losing a little water into the dark, exactly as fast as they should. "That will do," she said at last. "Keep it out of the coke dust." "Yes." "And take the brick out of your head. It is in the door where it belongs." "How did you know I—" "Everybody wants the brick," said Maud, and went back up the stair. She took the first load off the 5th kiln at 20 minutes past 1 in the morning. She went in with the lamp and knelt at the edge of the hair, and she did not look at the hops first. She pushed her arm down through them to the cloth and felt along the underside of the bed with the flat of her hand. 6 places for the cold spot that says the fire is not reaching. Then she took a cone from the middle of the load and broke it, and then she took the strig and bent it, and it did not bend. It snapped cleanly like a dry twig in October, and the sound of it was the only thing anybody at Quernmore had wanted for 4 years. "Off," she said. "Now and quick, and mind the ridge at the north corner, and nobody puts a boot on that hair." They were still taking hops off at 5:30, and the sun came up on 19 people asleep in various attitudes on a cooling floor 2 feet deep in the best hops the estate had grown since the old Duke's time, and on Silas in a chair with his hat over his face, and on the Duke standing in the doorway with his bandaged hand, looking at Maud Hallowe's, who had gone to sleep sitting up against a bushel basket with her mouth open. "Wherever this finds you, is it warm where you are, warmer than a September night with a fire wanting watching? Stay a while with them. The crop is only half in." For 11 nights after that, the range never went cold, and neither, as far as anybody could tell, did Maud. The routine set itself hard by the 3rd night. Load at 7, take off at 1, load again at 2, take off at 8, and in the gap she slept on the hops with a sack over her, and the whole garden learned to walk quietly past that end of the cooling floor. The hops went from the floor to the press, and from the press into pockets, 10.5 feet of sacking each, trodden down by 2 men in stockinged feet, and every pocket was marked in Silas's hand with the kiln and the night, because she made him do it. "Why?" he said, on the 4th night. "Because when the factor comes and tells us they are poor, I want to know which fire lied to me. And if he tells you they are good, then I want to know that too, and so does everybody who carried a basket up that stair. The Duke came up every night and did not go away. He learned, in 11 nights, to tell whether a load was near ready by the sound the hops made when the scuppet went into them, which is a thing that takes most men a season and which he was pathetically proud of. And Maud let him be pathetically proud of it, and did not once tell him he was right in front of anybody else, because he had gone 4 years without being right about anything on that hill, and she thought he had better start in private. On the 9th night she came out of the second kiln at 3 in the morning and found him at the top of the cooling floor stair with 2 mugs and no coat. "There is tea," he said, "and there is a chair." "There is no chair on this floor. I have sat on a bushel basket every night for a fortnight." "There is a chair." There was a chair. It was set at the end of the floor where the drift of dried hops came up highest, and beside it a small iron stove of the kind gardeners use, a light with a kettle on it, and beside that a shelf, a plain oak shelf, planed and screwed to the wall at exactly the height of her own hand, with her 4 books on it, the 2 of her father's and the seed book and the almanac, brought down from the hole under the tiles where they had been on the floor, because there was nowhere else. Maud stood and looked at the shelf for rather a long time. "You went into my room," she said. "The books were on the floor. There was a candle standing on them. There was a candle standing on them because they were the only flat thing." She sat down in the chair because her legs had stopped consulting her. "You had it put at the height of my hand." He handed her the mug and looked at the stove and did not answer and did not mention it, then or ever. And by the end of that week the shelf had a bottle of oil on it and a saucer for pins, and had become the only place at Quernmore that was hers. That was the 9th night. On the 11th, at 7 in the evening, she went into the 4th kiln to lay the load and stopped in the doorway. The bed had been taken out and rebuilt. Not patched, rebuilt. The whole frame of it lowered and reset so that a load laid level to the top of it stood 10 inches deep and not 20, and there was fresh sawdust in the corners, and the brickwork at the fire hole had been opened out an inch and squared, and no one had said a word to her about any of it. Silas was on the floor outside in his chair. "When?" "Tuesday and Wednesday," he said, "while you was asleep. Him and the carpenter and Ned. He would not have it done in the daylight. He built those beds himself. He had them out of a book he believed in for 4 years. "Ah," said Silas. "Well, he has unbuilt them now, and if you say anything to him about it, he will go off across the park for 2 hours, so I should not if I were you." She did not say anything to him about it, but she laid that load herself, every inch of it, level by hand and not by shovel, and it dried in 5 hours and 10 minutes and came off the finest of the whole month. The hop factor came on the 22nd of September. Mr. Gillam of Suffolk had bought Quernmore hops for 19 years and had condemned 1,100 pockets of them 4 years earlier, and had a small curved knife on a string for cutting samples out of a pocket, and the manner of a man who does not enjoy his own honesty but insists on it. He was still in the lane when Maud understood how the month was going to end. He got down off the gig, and he looked at her, yellow to the elbows, in an apron, hair tied up in a cloth. And then he looked at the Duke, and then he looked away, quickly and politely, as a man does who has been told a thing and has just had it confirmed. "His Grace's—" "Ah," said Mr. Gillam. "His Grace's dryer," said Maud. "Quite so, quite so." And he went in to look at the pockets, and he had the same expression on him the whole way up the garden, and Maud carried it about for the rest of the day like a stone in a shoe. She went out that evening when the light went up the empty garden, and nothing has ever looked more finished than a hop garden after the picking. Bines cut off at the knee, poles down in stacks, string hanging, the ground trodden to grey dust and littered with stripped leaf going brown, and wasps everywhere in the hedge working at the blackberries, drunk and stupid and dying. The heat had broken at last. There was a cold edge coming off the hill with the first smell of autumn in it, wet leaf and cold iron, and the smell of the crop was gone out of the air entirely, and it would not be back for 11 months. She sat down on a pole stack and let herself do the thing she had been not doing for 5 weeks, which was to look at it squarely. He had bought her. That was the fact underneath everything, and no shelf at the height of her hand was going to move it. £400 on a table, to a woman who held her the way a bailiff holds a chair, and he had paid it in 10 minutes on a Friday because his picking began on the Monday. And then, having bought her, he had been kind. He had been kind in the particular way that a man is kind who is paying something off. She had known it since the night on this floor when Silas said the name Amos Pascoe out loud. Amos Pascoe had been fond of him and had told him the truth about his kilns and had been ruined for it and had died in a room with a wet wall, and there was no possible way in this world for the Duke of Quernmore to make that good. And then there had arrived at his gate, sold to him in notes, a person who knew the same trade and would tell him the same truth, and could be kept warm and given a chair and a lamp on the stair and a shelf at the height of her hand. Of course he was kind to her. She was the second chance for a debt that could not be paid to the man it was owed. She was where the money went now. That was not nothing. She wanted to be clear with herself that it was not nothing. To be the place a good man puts what he cannot put anywhere else is more than most people are ever given, and she had had 5 weeks of it, and 11 nights of shared work she would think about when she was 70. But it was not the other thing, and she had, somewhere in the middle of those 11 nights, begun to want the other thing, and she had better say it to herself in plain words on a pole stack in the dark, because a thing you will not name goes on growing in the dark. She was 34 years old and plain, and had yellow dust in the creases of her hands. She was a woman his own factor could not look at without looking away. She was the dryer at Quernmore, and there was nothing on this earth better than that. And when the crop was sold, his articles were served, and the debt was paid, and the year was over. And a man does not put a shelf up for a woman he intends to keep for 30 years. He puts a shelf up for a woman who is leaving in a fortnight and whose books are on the floor. A wasp came at her hand and she moved it, and the wasp fell into the dust and could not get up, being past it, being the end of September. "Well," Maud said out loud, "there it is." She sat a while longer. Then she got up and slapped the dust off her skirt and went down the hill to see whether Silas had got the tally book written up, because the pockets had to be numbered before Mr. Gillam came back on the Friday, and self-pity is a thing that keeps, and hops are not. Her aunt came on the Thursday, one day before the factor. She came in a hired trap with a new bonnet, and she had heard from her sister-in-law's cousin, who had it from a carter, that Quernmore had got in the biggest crop in the Weald, and that the whole parish was talking about the woman in the oast, and she came up the garden to where the pockets stood in the barn in ranks like soldiers, with Effie and Ned and Silas and half the pickers waiting on their pay, and she said it there, in front of all of them, in a carrying voice, because a carrying voice was her one gift. "There is my niece," said Aunt Dunmore. "Nobody need tell me what she is doing at that end of the barn with her sleeves up. I know what she was bought for, and so do all of you, and I will say this for his grace, he has kept her better than I could have." Nobody laughed. That was the strange part. Maud had expected laughing. There was a silence in that barn of a kind she had not heard before, and it had shapes in it, and one of the shapes was Effie putting down the tally book very slowly. Mr. Gillam came at 9 on the Friday and cut his first sample at past, and by then there were 40 people in the barn, and nobody had asked them to come. He worked up the ranks with his knife on its string. He cut into the sacking of a pocket, drew out a handful with the cut edge held open, and stood at the door with it in the flat of his hand in the daylight, and he crushed, and he smelled, and he bent the little stems between his fingers one after another, and wrote in a book, and said nothing whatever for a quarter of an hour, which in a hop barn is a form of torture. At the 9th pocket he stopped. "Whose fire is this?" "Kiln 4, said Silas from his chair. "Night of the 19th. "I did not ask which kiln. I asked whose fire." "Mine," said Maud. "They are all mine," she added, because 40 people were listening and it wanted saying properly. "Every pocket in this barn came off a load I laid. and a load I took off, and if there is a fault in any one of them, it is my fault, and no one else's on the place." Mr. Gillam turned the hops over in his palm. "There is no fault in them." "Say the rest of it, sir, if you please." "These people carried them." "Very well." He put the sample down on the pocket. "I have bought for 19 years. Quernmore hops have been the best grown and the worst dried in this county for the whole of that time, and 4 years ago they were the worst I ever condemned in my life, and I did condemn them, and I would do it again. These are not those." He looked round the barn at the ranks of them. "These are prime, bright without brimstone in them, which I hardly ever see, dry through to the strig. And there is no case hardening in one of the 9 I have cut, which in a square kiln of that pattern I would have called impossible, and I should be obliged, madam, if you would tell me how it was done, since I shall be asked." 10 inches deep instead of 20, said Maud. "Small fire, kept even, twice as long. 2 loads a night instead of 1, which wants twice the coke and 11 people awake, so it is dearer, and any planter who tries it must know that before he begins. And the sulphur put in at the start, 4 pounds, not 8 at the end. 10 inches, he wrote it down. The book says 20. "I know what the book says," said Maud. "The book is wrong, and the man who wrote it never stood in a kiln, and I would be glad if you would say so in Southwark, because there are 5 ruined ranges in this county that I know of, and every one of them was built by somebody who could read." Mr. Gillam looked at her for a moment over the top of his book, and then he did something that had not happened to her in 4 years. He took his hat off. "I will give 112 shillings the hundredweight for the whole barn," he said, "which is within 4 shillings of the top price in England this year, and I will take every pocket, and I will come back next September if His Grace continues to employ you, and I shall come first and not last." It was into the noise after that. Because there was noise, a great deal of it, 40 people who had carried baskets up a stair all month, that Aunt Dunmore began to talk about money. She had to say it 3 times before anybody attended. When they did, she was standing in the middle of the barn floor with her reticule in both hands, and her voice had gone up, and it had lost the carrying quality. And this is what she said, that the price was very fine, and that she was glad of it, and that it would not have happened without her. That she had kept the girl and fed the girl and had brought her here herself in a trap at her own expense. That £400 was less than the value of what she had provided, as anybody could now see, and that she would take a further 200, or she would take her niece home with her tomorrow, being her only surviving relation and her natural guardian, whatever anybody chose to pretend. "You have no guardianship of a woman of 34, said the Duke. "I have the right of an aunt. You have the right of anybody in England, which is to be answered civilly and then to go away. She was in my house 4 years. She was in your wash-house 4 years. His voice did not rise. It went flat, which was worse. "I bought a person from you across my own table. There is nothing you can say in this barn that shames you as much as that shames me, madam, so you had better not try to say it." Aunt Dunmore looked round the barn for the first time and found out what was in it. Effie with her arms folded, Ned in the doorway with a pocket on his shoulder, not putting it down, Silas in his chair, looking at his boots, 40 pickers, and a factor with his hat in his hand, and nobody at all on her side, and the understanding came over her face in stages, and the last stage was not wickedness. It was fright, plain, ordinary, elderly fright, the fright of a woman who has been managing on other people's necessity for 30 years and has just been shown a room where nobody needs her at all. "I am not a cruel woman," she said. Her mouth was not working properly. "I am not. I had 11 shillings a week and a house full of beds to make. I did not have You do not know what it costs to keep a girl who reads. You have none of you the least notion what I—" And then she stopped, because whatever came next was not going to be believed, and she knew it, and she stood there in her new bonnet in the middle of a barn full of hops with nothing left to be. Maud crossed the floor and took her arm. "The trap will not take you back before dark," she said, "and you would be on the Maidstone Road in it at 9 at night. There is a bed in the house tonight, and Effie will give you something hot, and Tam shall drive you in the morning, and you may tell them in Stapleford that I do very well, and that it was you who placed me here. It is true enough, and it will do you some good, and I shall not contradict it." Nobody in that barn said anything at all. Aunt Dunmore's mouth opened and shut, and then Maud walked her out into the light, and that was the end of it. The next morning was the 26th of September, and the pockets began going out of the barn at 7, and Maud got her box down from under the tiles at 8 and put it on the chair at the end of the cooling floor. Silas came up the stair while she was folding an apron into it, and stood and got his breath, and did not offer to help, which she was glad of. "So that is what you are at," he said. "The crop is sold? The bargain was for the crop." She folded the second apron. "He paid £400 for a dryer for 1 season, and he has had the best of it, and I have had wages in my own name in a book. It is a clean end. There is a man at Boughton wants a dryer for next year, and I shall write to him from the town. You could say a word to him? And what word would that be?" She stopped folding. "Silas, look at what I am. I am a woman his own factor could not look in the face on Monday. I have been in this barn 5 weeks, and the whole parish knows to a shilling what I cost. If I stay here past the crop, there is only one thing in the world that any of them will ever say about him or about me, and it will follow him to his grave, and he has had 4 years of being followed already." She put her hands flat on the lid of the box. "He was kind to me because he had a debt he could not pay to a dead man. I understood that a fortnight ago sitting on a pole stack, and I did not mind it as much as you would think, but you cannot build a life on being where somebody's money goes. That is not what I have been watching all month. Then we have watched different things, and one of us has been up all night, and it was not you." She said it too hard and heard it, and put her hand on his shoulder to take it back. "I am sorry." Silas looked out of the door at the empty garden. "I have dried hops 60 years, he said, "and I have learned one thing, and I will make you a present of it, because you have not learned it yet, for all you are better at the trade than I ever was. Nothing is saved by heat. Heat is not what saves a thing. What saves a thing is somebody sitting up with it all night when they could be in their bed." "Yes," said Maud. "Well, nobody is sitting up with me." And she shut the box. He came at 4 in the afternoon, across the garden, and he came to the pay table. The pay table was set up outside the barn on 2 trestles, and Effie had the tally book, and 60 pickers were in a line with their children and their bundles waiting for the money that was the whole point of the month, and Mr. Gillam was there with his gig loaded, and Ned was there, and Silas was in his chair in the sun. Maud was at the end of the table putting the tally against the bushel count, because she had done it every year of her life and could not stop. The Duke came round the end of the table and stood in front of all of them and took his hat off, which nobody had ever seen him do at a pay table. "I have a thing to say, and I shall say it badly," he said. "I bought this woman's articles from her aunt in my own house for £400. That is the worst thing I have done since I killed Amos Pascoe's living with a book, and I have done it in front of my own people, and there is no way to unsay it, so I shall not try. Gillam, what did you tell me in the barn?" "That she is the best dryer in the county," said Mr. Gillam. "She is the dryer at Quernmore. Those hops in your gig are hers. Every pocket. Say that in Southwark." He stopped. He looked at his hat. "And that is the whole of what I owe her, and I have paid it. And now I am asking for something I have no right to ask in the same hour, and I have stood in the park for 2 hours trying to find a way to ask it that is not. There is not one. Maud, do not go to Boughton. Stay and be my wife, and I will not say another word about the £400 as long as I live, except that it was the luckiest wicked thing I ever did, and I am ashamed of it, and I would do it again." 60 pickers heard that, and the wasps went on in the hedge. Maud put down the tally book. She came round the trestle, and she stood in front of him, and she said, "Say the first part again." "Which part?" The part where you told Mr. Gillam what I am. She is the dryer at Quernmore, he said. Yes, said Maud. Well, then I shall stay. And she took hold of his lapel with a hand yellow to the wrist and kissed him in front of the entire pay table, and Effie began writing very hard in the tally book, and Ned cheered before he could stop himself and was mortified for a week. They were married in the church below the garden at the end of October, with the poles stacked and the ground turned, and the register signed by Silas, whose hand had got so bad by then that he made it in 2 goes, and who lived to see 3 more crops and dried none of them and criticised them all from a chair. Effie came back the next September and every September after, and ruled 60 pickers from a copper in the open, and would call the Duchess of Quernmore nothing but the dryer to the end of her days. Ned pulled poles that year and was head of the garden by the 3rd, and got his men paid by the acre in the end, having been right about it at 4 in the morning. Aunt Dunmore went home in the trap and told Stapleford that she had placed her niece with a duke, and was believed, and dined out on it for 11 years, and was written to twice a year, and answered once, and was sent coal every winter without being told who sent it. And Mr. Gillam came first and not last every year, and stood in the barn with his knife on its string, and on the 2nd year he cut into a pocket and found something not quite right in it, and opened his mouth, and the Duke said from the doorway, before his wife could get a word out, "Do not tell her the load was slack, Gillam. Nobody puts fire under hops she is drying, and nobody takes them off but her, and she will have your knife off you." The estate room at Quernmore smelled of ink and old apples, and there were no wasps at the window in November, and the money for the year's crop was on the table in the middle of it, in notes, in the same place it had lain once before. Maud counted it, because she was the one who counted things now, and wrote the coke and the pickers and the polemen and the sacking against it in her own hand in a book with her own name in the front. Her husband stood over by the door with nothing to do and nothing to count, exactly where a girl with a box at her feet had once stood counting wasps, and he watched her work with his bandaged hand in his pocket, and he thought, as he thought most days, that he had never in his life paid so little for so much. "There," she said, and turned the book round for him. 112 shillings and the whole barn, and £8 and 4 shillings owing to the carpenter, which we shall pay him tomorrow. Look at it before you say anything." "I am looking at it." "You are not." "No," he said. Nobody, in all the years after, ever quite got over the fact that the Duke of Quernmore had bought a woman off her aunt for £400 and had got in return the best dried crop in England, and every one of them told it wrong, because they all told it as a stroke of luck. It was not luck. It was 11 nights of somebody sitting up with a thing that could not save itself, and a man who put his own kilns to pieces in the dark rather than be right, and neither of those is luck, and both of them are commoner than people suppose. So here is the question, and then good night. What is there in your keeping just now that will not come to anything on heat and hurry, but might come to everything if somebody sat up with it? Think it over, and come back, and there will be another fire wanting watching.